I'm Miriam Parker, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Miriam Parker.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Miriam Parker on the show with me today. When we're recording this is her launch date for her brand new book, The Shortest Way Home. This is a really awesome summer read. It is lighthearted yet poignant. And it's just a lot of fun. I think you guys are really going to love this book. No matter where you're coming from as a reader, there's something in this book for everyone. Welcome to the show, Miriam.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's a good question. My first memory is I was in third grade, and my teacher, I think, didn't really know what to do with me. And so she sent me out in the hallway and gave me a notebook and told me to write stories. And so that's what I did.
and you're like, is this supposed to be punishment or something?
Right. It's not clear if I was in trouble or if I was just driving her crazy. But I always loved to read. I was a reader from a very young age. And that experience of sort of sitting by myself in this little common area outside of my third grade classroom with my notebook, drawing pictures and writing stories, was certainly an important one for me.
I love that so much. Were you a big reader at that point? I think probably obviously you were.
I was the kid who carried around books with me everywhere I went. I loved big fat books. You know, I think Little Women was one of my favorites because I loved it, but also because it was very long. And, you know, whenever I was reading it, people thought that I was smart.
Were there, other than Little Women, were there particular stories or genres or types of stories other than big that really captured your imagination?
I loved realistic stories. I loved the Little House on the Prairie books. I loved, there were these books called, by a person named Noel Streatfeild that were about dancing shoes. Each book had a different type of shoe that it was about. I loved historical fiction, especially about, set in New York. I remember there were these books, they were called the Sunfire romances, and they were like romances for young people. They were kind of chaste romances, I guess. Yeah. And they each were set in a historical setting, and there was, the woman was the main character, and she had to decide between two men. One was kind of bad and one was kind of good. And I loved those books, and I read them over and over again.
I love that. I read the whole Little House series with my kids when they were little, and I had forgotten how amazing those books are.
Yeah.
I hope that we don't lose sight of those books and some like those, because they're just such awesome books. So at what point, Miriam, did you, so your third grade teacher obviously recognized the gift, the curse, whatever you want to, that you had. But at what point did you realize that this was, a job, an industry, a hobby, whatever it was for you that you were going to pursue headlong?
Well, it's a little, there's two different prongs of it because, when I was in college, I was a reader, and I really lucked into a job after college, working in a book publisher. My expertise at the time was in website building, and this book publisher needed someone to help build their websites, and so that's how I got into book publishing, a little bit through a non-traditional way. A lot of people come in as a publicist or an editor, but I came in as an internet marketer.
Sneaky, I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And at the time, I thought reader. I really, I was a person who loved to read. I had read 5 books a week in college. I was ready to read 5 books a week in my job. And the writing just sort of snuck up on me a little bit. I started, I kind of needed something to do. So I took a writing class, then I took another writing class. I wrote some stories, and then I ended up in an MFA program, mostly because of, a side hobby. And that's really when I started getting serious. And I wrote my first unpublishable novel when I was in graduate school.
Everybody has one of those. They're
fantastic. I have 3. So,
what did you study in your undergrad? Did you study web design or marketing or?
I actually studied English, but I went to Columbia, and there's a science requirement at Columbia, and one of the classes that I didn't want to take real science, so I found this computer science class that was basically for literature majors, and I learned how to write HTML, and this was in 1996, when that was an extremely valuable skill, and I got jobs all over New York City. I worked at MTV, and I worked at ABC, and I worked at a startup. Just writing HTML. And so that's really what, even though I was reading books in college, I was making money making websites. Nice. And that was what I thought I was going to do after I graduated. And I sort of is what I did, but about books.
When you pursued your MFA and you started kind of realizing that this was something you had and you wanted to work on it and hone that skill and all of that, what are some of the things that you learned in your MFA that maybe surprised you, or that did it open your eyes in any way to storycraft in a way that you had never thought about?
Absolutely. I think and this is sort of a classic thing to teach in a creative writing program, but one of the first classes I took, the teacher got up and drew a big iceberg on the board and, drew a little bit of water. And he said, writing a story is an iceberg. He's like, everything that's under the water, but you only put in the book what's above the water. And I think that's such an important thing to remember when you're writing, because while you may have a lot of research or you may have a lot of background about characters, what you have to put in the book is just what the reader needs in order to understand the story that you're telling.
Right. At what point did you go from writing HTML to actually working in the publishing industry on publishing?
It was actually my first job. So I graduated from college in, May of the year 2000, and I started working at Time Warner Trade Publishing, which was Little Brown and Company, and what at the time was called Warner Books, in July of 2000. So I went straight from graduation essentially to my desk.
Wow. And you're working as an editor?
I was working, building the company website, writing marketing newsletters, building author websites. I built one of James Patterson's first websites. I built George Pelicanos' website. I built Sidney Sheldon's website. And I built the first website for the book, The Twilight series, Stephanie Meyer. So I did a lot of that stuff, and it was really fun. I loved it, and I was sort of but it really taught me about the business of publishing, because I was a young person who had information that a lot of the older people around me didn't have, and so I was able to go in and really meet authors and talk to them and teach them about their what they needed to be doing with their online platforms, and that kind of evolved into me, teaching them about social media. So it was an evolution over the years of me just trying to be one step ahead of the authors.
Well, that's really interesting, because a lot of people will pursue an MFA or really get into the nuts and bolts of creative writing, and they don't want to be bothered with the reality that now authors are not just writers that sit in a cabin on the hill and throw a manuscript down the hill at the end and then go write a new one. They really have to be savvy business people. It's just the reality of it, that you have to be engaged with your audience, and you can write the best book in the world, but if you don't have an engaging way to connect it with people, you're going to miss at least a big portion of maybe the reading audience. Is that a difficult thing for you, or does it just come naturally melding those two aspects? Now, the publishing, the writing part of it, and then the marketing, and
it's
kind of
interesting.
being a full author package.
Right. I will say that it is much easier to tell other people what to do than to do it yourself. So, had a lot of ideas about what I was going to do as an author and all the social media I was going to do. And I'm okay at social media. I think I'm like at this point, like, you know, I give myself a B. There's some authors who are really good at it. You know, but I do have a day job. And so I can't, you know, be on Twitter all day long, to my actually great chagrin. So I think I'm okay at it, but and I do appreciate following authors and listening to the stories that they're telling on social media, because, you know, you can't just talk about your own book. You have to talk about all the other things that are happening in the world. And I love listening to authors talk about their lives.
Absolutely. So you wrote the 3 unpublishable novels, you know, earning those experience badges as you go.
Yeah.
You've also had some short stories published before your newest novel, The Shortest Way Home. Are you a big fan of short stories, or is this just part of your publishing path? How do short stories work into what you do?
Well, I love reading short stories. I think the short story form an incredibly difficult form to master. A novel is in some ways easier because you can just throw everything in a novel. But a short story, it's compact. You have to tell a story in such a short period of time. So I think I have had 2 short stories published. Those are the only 2 good short stories I've ever written. And I'm very grateful that they were published. But I haven't written another one since, I'll be totally honest.
Well, let's talk about The Shortest Way Home. Where did this story come from for you? And did the setting or the character come first? How did this kind of develop for you?
Well, you know, what came first really was that I wanted to write a book about the things that make me happy. You know, I knew I was going to be writing the book in kind of the wee hours of the morning and on vacation and on the weekends. And so I was like, well, what do I really love? And, you know, what I really love are dogs, wine, talking about relationships, and friendships. And I wanted it to be an escape, and it had to be an escape for me as well as for the reader. So I chose Sonoma because it was a place that I had been to and really loved in the past and thought was really beautiful and evocative, and was a place that I could sort of, when I was sitting at that little desk early in the morning.
Where did you grow up, by the way?
I grew up in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Okay. Which is a little town right north of New York City.
Gotcha. So you kind of had the benefit of maybe smaller town life, but also having access to the big city as well.
Yeah, Hastings is a little tiny town. I went to the same kids that I went to kindergarten with or even nursery school with, I graduated from high school with, so we all knew each other super well. So it definitely has that small town feel. But, you know, we could also, once we got old enough, go into the city on the weekends and, you know, hang out on St. Mark's Place and buy CDs.
Right. I asked that because the 2 real settings of this book. You've got the big city, and then you've got kind of the smaller wine country, and then you've got Hannah, who thinks that everything that she wants is somewhere else. And then she gets there and it is for a while. But then, you know, we've got this whole, you know, the grass is always greener, kind of thing. And the emotions that are all tied up in that. When you first started thinking about Hannah and her story, how did you decide where to set the book?
Well, what I wanted was for Hannah to be a person who, she grew up sort of far away from everywhere. You know, I looked at a map and I picked a place in Iowa that for her to be from that was near nothing and was a super small town. And so that she would have this idea, and I wanted her to be the kind of person who was always trying to escape, who was always trying to find the next best thing. And she figures it out pretty well. I mean, she's a pretty plucky character who is always trying to make the best of everything. But I think at the moment that this book starts, she is at a moment where she doesn't know how to fix it anymore. And this winery kind of comes upon her and sort of helps her make a realization that she couldn't have come to on her own.
Right. How did you pick the wine country? Is this your love of wine, and how much research went into understanding exactly how that whole thing works? You know, we can love a bottle of wine, but the thing that actually makes it, and all of the toil and all the heartbreak and all that, is something that most of us are just not prepared for.
Exactly. Yeah, I did do quite a bit of research. I have a friend who works in the wine business who I asked a lot of questions of. And then I went out, once I knew I was writing the book, I went out to Sonoma and I stayed in a little cottage out there for about 2 weeks. And in the mornings I would write, and in the afternoons I would drive around Sonoma County with my dog in the passenger seat. And we went into all these different wineries and interviewed people in the wineries about how they grow the grapes, how they bottle them, how they serve them, just what goes into making a winery. I read a lot of books. So I tried to get as much information as I could so that I would feel confident writing about wine and the business of wine in addition to the drinking of it and the pairing of it.
Gotcha. When you were writing this, did the character of Hannah, how close are you to the character of Hannah? Was she someone that you knew? Did you just create her out of nothing? What does she mean to you personally?
I think that we have a lot of similarities, especially, and it's interesting when you write a book, you choose a moment in time when the book starts, and then you as a person, continue to grow and evolve, but the book stays in that moment, So, but you have to keep writing it as if it's that moment. So, I do think there's a lot of some friends that I've had in Hannah, people I've observed, and I've seen a common struggle with, young, smart, ambitious women that they maybe sometimes privilege love over their career, or maybe they don't really know what their career should be. They don't know exactly what they want. And I wanted this book to be an inspiration to women or people of any age. Just because you're on a certain path doesn't mean that you have to stay on that path. There are options for you out there and ways you can change.
Yeah. You described Hannah as the kind of person who's always looking to escape or to be somewhere else. When she gets to Sonoma and everything is perfect and wonderful, and then the veneer starts to dull a little bit and the shine is not as, everything's not quite as wonderful as we make it up. This story could be very dark. It could really take some dark turns, but you keep the writing not only engaging so that we keep wanting to see what happens next, but there's a kind of an air of hopefulness throughout the book. Is that something you consciously do, or are you a normally glass half full kind of person?
I guess it turns out that I am sort of an optimist. I'm not sure if you told me when I was younger that I was one, that I would agree, but I think I am. I wanted to write a hopeful book. I wanted to write a book that was fun. And I didn't also, as you write characters, you start to love them, and you really don't want to hurt them too much, So I didn't want to hurt them too much, just enough.
Right, just enough to keep us wanting to know what happens next. And
there are a lot of books where really bad things happen to characters.
Right.
And this, and so I didn't feel that I had to do that.
You deal with the idea a lot of, when we're constantly wanting to escape, things are never quite, the way we envision them, to be. And even with love, we go to a certain place, we find what we think we're looking for, and then that other person, is maybe dealing with the same things, and they're looking for their, ideal situation. There's a real twist that happens, and Hannah has to deal with that. What are you hoping to get across to readers through that storyline?
I think one thing that I've learned in my life is that go, there you are. You're still yourself, no matter how much you change up your, location or your environment. And at the end of the day, you're still yourself. So, and I think Hannah kind of figures that out. I mean, she maybe doesn't know exactly who she is. And I think part of this book is her figuring that out. But I think, it's also about, figuring out who you are and being happy in the place that you're in and making it the best it can be for you. And you're right, as you said, I think in your question, there are other people in the world who also are dealing with, with difficulties and trauma, and as a feeling and thinking person, you have to be able to interact with them. It's not all about Hannah. She has to also, try to interact with other people and help them.
Right. I have 3 daughters, and we're all the time talking, and they're young women now. They're not girls, but we're all the time talking about the fact that you have to be happy with yourself, and you have to be good with you and you alone, before you can bring anybody else into the situation, because it's just going to be weird, if all of your hopes and dreams are piled on this other person, and thank God they have not, needed, someone else for validation. And I really love that about this book, in that you really bring that out, that we really think that if we can find this other place, we will be happy. If we can find this other person, we will be happy. And you really have to figure out who you are before all of that will start to make sense.
It's so true. You summed it up better than I could. I'm glad that your daughters are able to know that at a young age. That really just propels them so much further ahead than the rest of us who are just sort of trying to figure that out.
It was through a lot of my mistakes that I learned that. You said that this was a book that you wanted to write, something that you love, because you would be doing this in your personal time, and that you wanted that to mean something to you. So how long did it take you to write this book? And were you writing in the wee hours of the morning and on vacation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it took me about 2 years to write it, and then another year or so to revise it, and then it's taken another year or so for it to be published. So just because of timing and things like that. So yeah, so it's quite a long process, but a process that I really enjoyed. And yes, I did write at every opportunity that I could, on in the mornings, on the weekends, on vacation, any minute that you can find. Even if you just I'll sometimes write a sentence in my phone and then transfer it into the document later. Sometimes in my lunch hour, any minute that you can find to write a few words helps create a book.
Absolutely. Are you a planner, a plotter, or are you a discovery writer or pantser? How much of the book do you know ahead of time before you start writing?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a discovery writer, which means that I have to revise an enormous amount. I make mistakes and things don't make sense, and I'm always cutting and adding, but I'm trying to outline my next book, but I just hate doing it, and I really do like to see where the story takes you. I love the moment when a character does something that you didn't quite expect, and as a writer, that's the part of writing that gives me joy. So I'm not sure I'll ever be a very good planner. I think I'm always going to be a discoverer.
I love the idea of planning, and the idea that I could sit down and I could open up a document and I would know right what I needed to write that day. But the application of that just really stinks. I hate it. I hate all the work that goes into I don't know. But yeah, I feel your pain.
Yeah.
The book, The Shortest Way Home, is available right now. You can get it on Kindle, and also in hardcover. There's links to it in the show notes. Also, the audiobook is out. And, if folks would love to listen to the audiobook of this, you can actually get a free one from Audible if you go to audibletrial.com/Hank, and you can get The Shortest Way Home, for free with a free trial of Audible. Miriam, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. If people are just learning about you, where can they connect with you online and find out more about you and follow along with your next novel coming out?
Well, they can visit my website, miriamparker.com, and definitely follow me on social media, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I like Instagram the best, but I'm on all of them. So
excellent. Miriam, we wish you the utmost success with The Shortest Way Home. Thank you for writing this fantastic book, and thank you for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The year was 1834. The month was December. I was 14. Irving's tale was by then well known. The characters of Brom Bones and the beauteous Katrina were widely understood in town to refer to my parents. Rumors persisted. I heard the name of Headless Horseman whispered. My father dismissed all these tales, calling them malicious. Yet more than once I saw him and my mother scanning Agatha's face across the supper table, finding only a secret smile and a look of defiance. I found the rumors fascinating. I followed Agatha like a pup, waiting for her to cast some magic spell. And one day she did. The household servants had set a fire in the hearth for her comfort, and she sat close to it, counting out small gold coins upon a lapboard. I hid in the shadows, hoping she might drop a coin and I could retrieve it for myself. One of her servants, a West Indian girl, carried a snowy log into the room and set it on the fire. It began to hiss and pop, the snow melted, and the fire sputtered out. Agatha cursed as I had never heard her do before. She stood, spilling all the gold, and slapped the idiot girl across the face. The girl ran, and my grandmother muttered to herself, searching for match and tong to no avail. When she was not looking, I crept forward and took for myself one of the gold pieces. Then something remarkable occurred. My grandmother sighed, knelt before the fireplace, reached for the logs, and her right hand caught a fire. Flame blossomed and coiled about her wrist. I gasped and cried out, "Shh! Don't be afraid, my Dylan." "Your hand!" She raised her palm. Flame sat cupped in it, casting the shadow of her fingers upon the ceiling and walls. "Lock the door," she said. I obeyed. She pointed to the floor, and I sat, waiting breathlessly. "This is the Van Brunt gift. It will be your gift as well, soon, and your children's forever afterwards." "Why does it not burn you?" I asked. "Why should it? Do I deserve to be burned?" "No." "Then I am safe from the fire. Do you deserve to be burned, my Dylan?" I shook my head. "Show me." I reached for the flame and took it. I pulled back at once, crying out with pain, wagging my fingertips. The fire caught my sleeve. I could not rid myself of it, as if I clutched burning tar. The pain intensified. The blisters broke, and a rivulet of lymph ran down my arm. "Your conscience knows, Dylan. You deserved to be burned. Say it." "I deserved to be burned," said I. "Again." "I deserved to be burned." She turned her palm. "The gold piece." I nodded and brought the stolen coin from my pocket. She took it and raised it to the light. "You cannot wield the flame with guilt in your heart, son. Try, and it will devour you. Do you understand?" I nodded. "A Van Brunt should not be so weak." "I'm sorry I took the gold, Grandmother. I'm sorry I was bad. Don't be ashamed of me." She frowned and laid the gold coin on her lapboard. She shook her head sadly. "I'm not ashamed that you took the gold. I'm ashamed that you felt the guilt.